great to have you here. This has already been a great day of conversation and discussion. And so a couple people asked me during the break, Peter, are you ever going to get to anything practical? So I appreciate the honesty. And the answer is yes. We've talked about some theory about some things, and this is very much time to go a little bit deeper in just one aspect of this whole conversation of faith, work, and economics and calling, and how we've thought about implementing it. So this is going to be more kind of focused on my own experience and some of the things that we've learned, some of the things that have gone well, and some of the things that haven't really gone well. But as we've already seen today, I think the real benefit is going to be in the conversations. And so please do feel free to interject, interrupt if you have any comments or questions as we're going through this. But I wanted to start with a story about my son, because it's just fun to tell stories about your kids. And how many of you have had the opportunity to involve your family members or friends, close friends, in the work that you do and in some of the travels? Has anyone had that opportunity? I had a pastor that asked me if there were ever opportunities where I could travel with a family member, and it has been awesome. Some of the best memories that I have with my kids have been these kind of combined trips. And I also mentioned earlier that I have this travel of the number of nights that I can be away from my family. But if I bring a family member with me, it doesn't count as a night away from family. So there have been several times that I've said, come on kids, it's time to go with daddy. We gotta go on a trip. But one of the incredible trips that I had was with my son. His name is Keith. He now is 11 years old. But when he was 9 years old, he had the opportunity to go to Rwanda. And Rwanda is where my wife and I were married. We had our first date in Uganda, rafting down the Nile River. Rwanda's been a place that has just taught us so much. We have been changed forever as a result of our time there. And so I had an opportunity to bring my son, and we showed up, and as with a work trip, there's a lot of kind of fun, and then there also is work. And one of the things that happened is I was in this meeting, had a time where I needed to be in a meeting, and so Keith came to me and he said, Dad, can I go play outside? And I said, of course. And so he went outside, and Keith is kind of a gregarious guy. Saw him very quickly kind of making friends, being with these other kids. He didn't speak any Kinyarwanda. They didn't speak any English. It was just fun to watch them having fun and playing together. And at the end of the meeting, I came out and talked to him, and Keith said, Dad, you'll never believe what I found. He said, look at this. And he had found a field that had been harvested, and in it there were some leftover beans that had been there. And so almost like the Old Testament gleaning, whoever owned the field had not gotten all of them, and there were a little bit left. And so he had collected these three bags of beans. And I thought, you know, that's pretty cool. Spend some time, and he was doing it with some other kids, and it was fun. We get back to the capital city, Kigali, and Keith says, we just spent time visiting entrepreneurs and learning about entrepreneurship, and we get back to the capital city, and he says, Dad, I've got to go to the market to sell my beans. And I was thinking, no, Keith, that's not how it works. You know, like, we're here to help others. But he said, Dad, we just spent all this time looking at entrepreneurs, and I've now got my beans. I got to go to the market and sell them. And so I'm thinking, oh no, like, no one's gonna buy beans from like an American little kid. But sure enough, he goes to the market, he sees a guy with a big bag of beans. He goes up to him and takes his 3 bags and says, would you like to buy my beans? And the guy says, no, I've got all the beans that I need. Goes to another place. I will forever be grateful to this man right here. This man bought Keith's beans, his 3 bags of beans. This is when, I guess, McCain and Palin were still running for office at this moment, based on the shirt behind him. But so he ended up selling these beans and turning like his little bit of playtime into this little bit of money. But the thing that blew me away is, you know what he did with his profit? He gave me a little money to go buy a donut because I had helped him. And then he went back to the guy who had all of the big beans. He bought more of those beans, subdivided them into small bags, and then went back to the market over the next day that we were there in the capital city. He was known as the international, American bean seller in Kigali. And he started with nothing, and he was known as the salesman, and he legitimately was making money. Last night there, he bought pineapples for the family that we were staying with. He ended up hiring another friend to help him with the beans, and I got the biggest kick out of this. Part of the reason that I got a kick out of here is because here is an 8-year-old American boy who has nothing other than a crazy idea, who goes and shows up cross-culturally and does something. This story happened right after we had another situation where we were in a community. We were sitting in this church where the program started, and there was a woman who showed up late, and she was blind, and her name was Anasitazia. She came in and she was a little bit late, and she had assistance, and when she finally got there, she participated when we were singing together. She was one of the most joyful singers. And when we got to the end, she asked if she could tell us her story. And so she stood up and she said, I may be blind. She said, I may be old. It turns out she was 80 years old. And she said, but my family has never seen me beg. She talked about how as an 80-year-old blind woman, she had lost everything that was closest to her in the '94 Rwandan genocide. She was left alone, and she was able to participate in this group where she was able to build onto her house. She was able to rent out the rooms, and as an 80-year-old blind Rwandan widow, she had started this business. And having this crazy, contrasting stories in such close proximity kind of blew me away in a little bit. That here's an 8-year-old American boy, and here's an 80-year-old Rwandan widow. Both of them starting with very little. Both of them, many people would look at and say, you know what, that's the age, or that's the type of personality that someone else is supposed to take care of them. And yet both of them realized something really significant, is that both of them had been entrusted by God with things in their hands, even if it was just a dream and a desire to do something productive. Both of them were entrusted with something, and they were both making things work. And I love that in my day job, I get to walk alongside individuals all around the world that many people would look at and say they have nothing to give, or those people, they deserve our charity, or those people must rely on the help of someone else. And I believe that just doesn't fit with the narrative that I see in Scripture of God breathing life and creating humankind in His own image, and having gifts and abilities that are simply because we are created in the image of a God who loves us and created us with gifts and abilities and creativity. And this sort of an approach, it totally changes the paradigm. The paradigm of some people are those who have been entrusted with a lot, and some people have nothing, and so there's a one-way flow of charity, or a one-way flow of funds, or a one-way flow of service. That doesn't match my experience. I believe everyone has something to give, and everyone has something that they need to receive. And the thing about Anasitazia, the thing about Keith, is when you have this approach, literally, you don't get some people with their heads down and their hand up, and some people feeling pretty proud of the way that they're able to help and make a difference. You don't get some people feeling like they're the savior of the world, and other people feeling like they're just eking by on someone else's assistance. You get people that stand tall. People that stand tall. And watching my son meet Anasitazia, both unlikely entrepreneurs from very different backgrounds, I thought that's kind of cool. That is kind of cool, where we recognize that everyone has something in their hands. Something in their hands that they can give. Again, that I think is really at the heart of this conversation, is recognizing everyone has worth, everyone has potential, everyone has dignity, and to really transition beyond a paradigm that says charity's the only way to help, and moves beyond that and says, how do we help equip individuals to use what they've been given to contribute to full flourishing? My experience is that that sort of an approach, or that side of a mindset, is uncommon in churches today. This idea that everyone has something to give and everyone has something that they need to receive. My experience is that is not the common paradigm. And my guess, we did actually a poll with George Barna, with it was called the Pastor's Poll. And what we found as we did this poll, we just wanted to get an element of how aware are pastors in America on this sort of an alternative thinking about how to help the poor, that a job is better than a handout. We just wanted to understand how many pastors are understanding this. And it was one of the most depressing studies I've ever seen in my life. It was less than 5% had any knowledge or any just kind of a framework to understand a way of helping individuals in poverty help themselves through job creation. That blew me away. Less than 5%. So you in this room, you're not normal in the most positive way possible. You, as you're thinking about this, and with the Kern Foundations, they've been doing so much to promote a different way of thinking. You're not normal. The paradigm in most churches continues to be a paradigm that is one of redistribution, not of wealth creation. This is despite an increasing body of knowledge that a model of redistribution is good in terms of relief and wrong in terms of long-term development. I remember reading a book by Bill Easterly called White Man's Burden, and in it there was this graph that kind of jumped off the pages. Anyone kind of had that experience where you're reading a book and you just have something that kind of captures in one graphic what it is that you've seen or experienced? This was my moment, again, by Bill Easterly. Now, what this is it looks at growth per capita in sub-Saharan Africa, and it looks about the golden age of philanthropy, this time where consciences were pricked, where response from the international community began to increase, and so aid as a percentage of a country's gross domestic product steadily increased from 1970 to the year 2000. Now, what would you hope happens during that period of time to growth rates in the places that are receiving all of this influx of aid? If this is working, right, you'd hope that there's a positive correlation between aid as it's flowing in and what? And growth. And yet, why is this so troubling? Why is this so troubling? What do you see here? What's the story that you read on this?
The more aid, the less growth.
Isn't that fascinating? And do you notice how it actually bumps along in negative territory? There was a book called Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo that makes a pretty compelling case that whether it's a natural resource curse or it is the charity curse, that countries that actually receive long-term aid, indiscriminate aid, it actually props up corrupt regimes, it actually squashes a middle class, it squashes a democratic process, and it actually becomes a cycle and a trap that countries have a really hard time breaking out. And so in this heyday of philanthropy, many of the countries are actually worse off. And this is not me, this is economists that have done a lot more research, have made a pretty compelling case that in some circumstances, it has actually been the amount of aid that is poured into a country that has contributed to a poverty trap. Now, this is a problem for those of us that, again, believe that the Bible is full of a compelling case for us to use what we've been given to be a blessing to others. This is a problem for us because when we recognize the massive amount of global need, when we recognize that we're called to do something, and then when we start doing something and recognize, wait a minute, it doesn't always seem like it's having a positive impact, that's a pretty challenging place to be. I believe Brian Fikkert and Steve Corbett's book, When Helping Hurts, the reason why that took off is because it was a book and a message that resonated with the experience that many of us have had. It was a book that was not out of the blue, but it was a message that resonated with so many of us that have been on short-term trips and seen this as the natural progression. First time we show up, it's from Bob Lupton's book, Toxic Charity, but the first time we show up in a community, first time we unzip our suitcases, the first time we meet with our brothers and sisters around the world and start giving things away, it's an incredible sense. There's gratitude. There's like appreciation. It's this wonderful experience. Things are going great. I can't believe you showed up and you cared. So we have such a positive experience. We go back and we raise more money and we pack more suitcases and we go back to that same community the next year. But instead of just this gratitude, we sense this feeling of anticipation. And something has changed. Something that before was so kind of joyous, like now you almost feel like, wait a minute, they expected us to come in, and gratitude is tempered. Show up a third year, and there's a sense of expectation. And maybe at this point, this is when if you don't bring exactly what the expectation was, or you don't bring quite as much as there was last year, there's this sense of, wait a minute, you didn't do what you did. I like last year's team better than this year's team. And something that started with such full gratitude has slipped into the sense of expectation. But it doesn't stop there. We go back another year, and there's this sense of entitlement. I believe entitlement is corrosive to progress. I believe entitled thinking, wherever it is found, erodes just this progress and hope, and it causes people to have no gratitude, and just this sense something grabs a hold of the heart when entitlement starts to sneak in. And then on top of that, if we go back another year, then it is full-blown dependency, and it is possible. It is possible that in some times and in some places that people are left more helpless and more hopeless than before we ever arrived. Now that's a pretty sobering realization. Has anyone had an experience like that where you've been on short-term trips, or you've been participating in such a way, and you've suddenly come to this realization that, wait a minute, something that felt so good at the beginning now has a different tone. Now it feels like it's not necessarily the same positive impact. Anyone had that experience? Yeah, share some of the stories. What have you seen? What have you experienced?
Well, it didn't have to be a short-term business trip, because if you deal with any urban area, this is what you deal with every day. It's confusing when you meet people who should be gracious,
yes,
but expect you to give them something.
Yes.
This is the formula that creates that type of thinking.
Yeah.
And then it becomes generational, and it's almost unbreakable at some point.
Well said. Yeah, well said. And doesn't that rob the joy in giving too? Like
the joy in giving and the joy of receiving.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. What else? A couple others said that. Yeah.
If you're a pastor at church, you may get calls from people that, they'll say, I'm in town, I need help. And I used to do what I could, but I remember one where they called me and said, I'm in town from such and such, I just need a place for you to put me up. Hotel. So I talked to the manager of the hotel and put the person up for that night, credit card. The next day I got a call from that person again. They wanted to be put up. I said, I'm sorry, I can't put you up. And they started to yell at me and were mad at me that I would not put them up. And so I was like, wow. Simple as that.
I think an important theological point that confirms this is that when you extend grace to somebody who thinks they deserve it, they do not experience it as grace.
Wow.
So God requires us to repent, where God gives grace to the humble, and He resists the proud. And so we've seen time and again on the streets, the guys with the signs on the side of the road, I stop, I roll down my window, I eyeball them, tell them my name's Dwayne, ask them their name, engage them in conversation. There's a dignity there. There's an exchange, and they're looking, and I'm asking them, how's it going today? They got the sign, say they're looking for work, but I know that sign is a prop to get donations, and so, and they inevitably always poor mouth. But, oh, it's tough, I'm not getting much out of it. They're playing on my pity. And I say, well, by the way, if you're interested in a job, run the front porch over here, we'd be happy to help you. But in the meantime, I wonder if you could make a donation to our ministry. And I put my hand out. And it is amazing how many guys look at me offended. Like, you're asking me for money? And I immediately put, oh, you get to ask, but I don't? I said, at least if you give money, you know what you give to me will go to a good cause. I've raised $8 for our ministry so far.
I've never heard anything like that. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. I love that, though, that you are legitimately offering them, if you're seeing the person, acknowledging them, and inviting them.
$2 is the biggest donation, but I get $1. I've done it 6 times.
Isn't that interesting? And 100% goes to Front Porch.
Ministry, that's right.
Yeah,
well, $1 didn't. I needed some chewing.
We're going to let you make that right tonight. Wow. Anyone else? Anyone else had this experience? Yeah.
I was chairman of the board of a missions agency, and in certain countries with the kind of work that we did, we began to sense that they knew we would come and they knew we would do certain things, and so we began to feel like we were being a shakedown of us because of their expectations and playing off of American desire to help.
Wow.
And so we had to radically change what we were doing in numbers of places.
Yeah.
Because it was, basically we said we're brothers in Christ, friends don't treat friends this way.
Yeah. Right.
And began to talk
Right.
about it.
Right.
Now there are cultural differences. but
Right.
We had to be sensitive and work
Right.
through that as well.
Right. So, yeah.
We had an experience in our church where we felt really good for a long time because on Thursday nights we would have a worship service and a food ministry right after.
Yeah.
It was really cool because 100 people show up and they're praising God, made great pictures and great testimonies, we thought. We give an altar call, people would respond.
Yeah.
We pray with people, and then we'd open the food ministry. But we hit a point where we couldn't do the food ministry for a few months because we were redoing the floor of the basement. And so we said, well, we're still going to have worship.
Right.
Everyone come. And no one came. And we started to realize at that point that we might have at one time been helping, but we weren't really moving people into a place of a new relationship with Christ and the destiny that God had in mind for them in serving and helping and in working. And that was a hard lesson because we hated to see the truth, but facing the truth has really released us to give the best and to encourage people to move towards new life.
Yeah. There's a whole term, Rice Christians, from that exact story played out throughout Asia. Yeah. Churches were full as long as the rice was being distributed. You know, this is hard. I don't know about you, but my experience is that the problem in even having this conversation is because it can tend to lead us to cynicism, you know? And it can almost feel like, well, I tried that, and those people didn't work. Anytime we use the phrase, those people were dishonoring God. And so there's this challenge, right, of how do we be wise, and how do we make sure we are being thoughtful? How do we make sure we are being intentional? And how do we guard our heart from still having a softness and compassion that I see in Christ? And I again think about the example of Jesus as so incredible of how there still was this tenderness and compassion in the midst of overwhelming need and of people, one of his closest friends, robbing from him. You know, how is there that sensitivity? That's what we want to have. So for me, I feel like this is part of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. There's a problem if it's not all of us. And my experience is that it sometimes was easier initially to love the Lord, my God, with my heart, and to actually feel like this area that I've got to do something. And then I felt like in graduate school it's easy to kind of have it be a cerebral exercise. And remember taking one course, Why Are Countries Poor, Volatile, and Unequal? We didn't talk about a single person. We talked about regression analysis and econometrics and about isolating variables. And it was so sanitized that it was disconnected from people. And increasingly, I just want to be someone who, yes, engages my mind. We want to think deeply about this. But I don't want to forget the heart of compassion. And I don't want to forget strength. I want to spend myself. I want to be tired as a result of loving others. I want my strength to be, I want to be stretched. And I feel like that's the challenge. And again, that's what I love about this group of people. You're here, you're doing such great work already. But I love that we get to think about heart and mind and soul and strength and engaging all of them in this incredible process of trying to love our neighbors. But for me, like the fundamental change in approach is I no longer think that we are smart or strong or resourced enough to solve the world's problems. I no longer believe, no matter how many resources we have, no matter how much prosperity in our churches or in our families, no matter how many classes we take, no matter how many books we read, no matter how much of all of this stuff that we have, on our own we are simply incapable of solving the problems of others. And so instead of seeing us as saviors that the world is waiting for us to come in, I really believe a different posture is one of friend. You know, we changed our mission statement at Hope. Our mission statement used to be investing in the dreams of the poor as we proclaim and live the gospel in the world's underserved communities. We took out the word poor because it had this sense of a material definition of poverty that made me uncomfortable, that we were referring to other people as poor and missing our own poverty in the process. It caused us to actually, in the places where we serve, to identify people by their current reality as opposed to defining them as God does, which is, man, these are children of God, loved, dearly prized. And that to me even changes everything. So this posture, if one starting point, one kind of big change is if we maybe have a little more sober judgment of just how capable we are in solving the world's problems, and instead really come along as friends and as partners and identify with people, not as problems to be solved, but brothers and sisters to be loved and to walk with. That approach causes us to change the conversation for what can I do for you to what is God already doing in your life and in your community. Instead of saying we're going to import solutions, to instead say, what is God already called and equipped? What is in your hands? And I believe that approach, when we stop and when we listen and when we learn, I believe that approach changes everything in how we approach the issue of poverty in our world. So many pitfalls are avoided if we start with that different approach. And I think that also eventually leads us, when we listen, you know what I hear 9 out of 10 times when I will sit with a family and when we'll get to a conversation? 9 out of 10 times when you sit and listen, you know what people are really wanting? If you really listen to them, you won't hear a request for more charity. You won't hear a request for their children to be sponsored. 9 out of 10 times, you know what you're going to hear? A request for a job. My experience is that when you sit down, people don't want their kids to be someone else's charity case. They want the dignity of providing for them. And so if that's what individuals are looking for, then why has the church been on the sidelines for so long in equipping individuals to actually help people find employment that helps lead to flourishing in the communities? And why is it, if that's true, that we're not truly celebrating the role of businessmen and businesswomen within our own communities? If that's really what individuals are looking for, how do we change the conversation to recognizing, as John Perkins said, the world's best anti-poverty program is a job? How do we have that not as some tertiary, but how do we have that as a central part of equipping and mobilizing and loving our neighbors? How do we actually do that? The great theologian Bono said this. He said, commerce is real. Aid is just a stopgap. Commerce, entrepreneurial capitalism takes more people out of poverty than aid. Isn't that pretty significant that this is Bono, who's been the one campaign spokesperson, the one who, as Bob Geldof said, it's just about aid, aid, aid. He's recognizing that is temporary. We've got to do something more long-lasting. Bob Geldof, Jim Clifton, who wrote The Coming Jobs War, said this. He said, if countries fail at creating jobs, their societies will fall apart. Wouldn't it be great if the church would see this as a really important part of its calling, to equip, to mobilize, to send out individuals into the marketplace, create jobs, and contribute to true human flourishing? I want to tell you just a little bit about how this works in just one example, one space, but hopefully this is just illustrative of a lot of good work that's happening around the world. But let's imagine for a moment, let's imagine that there is a woman named Deanna. Deanna is born in a position of poverty in Burundi. And so like many individuals, she didn't choose where she was born. She didn't choose her circumstances, but she is born into poverty. And she wants to provide for her family. And the way that she does that is with a needle and thread. She has a gift as a seamstress. And so every day she takes the jobs that she can have in her community and she sits down at her table and with a needle and thread, she is working. But she knows that if someday she could save up to get a sewing machine, she knows her productivity would go through the roof. And instead of taking one job a day, she could take 20 jobs per day. And yet the problem is that that sewing machine seems absolutely out of reach for her. The sewing machine costs $100, but every day she saves a little bit. Every day she's saving a little bit, she's getting jobs, and she under her mattress is putting a little bit more, and over time she's investing in her business, she's getting new needles, getting new thread, and every day she's having a little bit more. And over the years, she saves up more and more and more and more. Eventually, she saves up, after 5 years, the sum of $25. After 5 years, she's a quarter of the way there. Now, if it took her 5 years to save $25, how long is it going to take for her to save up to get that sewing machine? 20 years to save up $100. Now, if you're in that situation, and again, really imagine yourself, average life expectancy is just a little over 40 years. Imagine you're spending 20 years working for this seemingly impossible dream. And my question is, how do you hold on to hope for 20 years? Especially when every single day over those 20 years, when you wake up, you're making choices that you and I have never had to make in this context. You're making a choice about whether we save up for that sewing machine or whether we pay for our child's medical issues. You know, it's amazing that malaria and dehydration, diarrhea, the greatest killers in the world are issues that we know how to solve. People aren't dying just from malaria, they're dying from poverty. It's a question of not having $1 to go to the clinic to get the medicine. Especially when every day we're making a choice that you and I have probably never had to make. When we wake up this morning, I wasn't making a decision about which one child goes to school and which ones stay at home. That's a question I've never had to make for my kids, and yet that's the reality for so many. 67% of the individuals that we work with in Malawi are not able to send all their kids to school when they start, especially when every day you're making a decision about whether you serve food or whether you tell your kids to go to bed hungry every night. Again, those are questions that we don't have to ask ourselves or our family simply because of where we were born. And yet for Deanna, that's her daily reality. But I say 20 years is too long for her to have to wait. I don't want Deanna to have to wait 20 years. And so what would it look like? Is there any crazy way that we could think about mobilizing the church so Deanna wouldn't have to wait 20 years? Is there any way that we could fast forward progress that instead of 20 years, we could do it today? And that is what I believe, that there is a possibility. That today, we know what would happen. We know if Deanna could get access to that sewing machine, we know because we've seen it, that she would immediately increase her productivity. We know that she wouldn't be able to work alone, but she could work in a co-op. She could take on larger jobs. She could have more people that would work with her. We know that out of that, we know what she'd do with her money. She'd spend it on her kids. She would spend it on medicine. She'd spend it on her house. She'd spend it on food. She'd spend it on education. And what if we could do a system where it wasn't just helping Deanna, but what if we could do it where it's Deanna along with other community members? And what if we could do it in a way that Christ was at the very center of all of this? That it's not just helping Deanna and it's not just growing a business, but what if we could point her to the ultimate hope that's found in Jesus Christ? I think that would be pretty awesome. And this story, this simple illustration, Deanna is not fictional. I had time with Deanna when I was in Burundi. And the only difference in her story is when I asked her how long would it take to save up that $100 to get that sewing machine that she was using. When I asked her how long it would take to save up, she didn't say 20 years. She said that was an impossible dream. Isn't it awesome that the church gets to be part of making impossible dreams happen? And as we met with Deanna, the thing that we saw with her and with many others is this is not some person who sees herself as some second-class citizen. She was giving us a business lesson. She was talking about how she was able to start a cooperative. She was asking us about how we partner with other people. And she was on the move. She actually wasn't even stopping to talk with us. She was working as we were meeting with her because she had a job that she was doing, and she was so gracious. But that's not a picture of someone that you see in poverty. That's a woman who's going somewhere. That's a woman who is on the move. That's a woman who understands that she has been blessed to be a blessing in her community. And it's a woman that I love that we get to partner with. The way that we do this, and again, this is just illustrative of one model for one organization, but the way that we do this is around the world, we believe that the church has already been equipped with all the resources that we need. Our base model starts with a model that we go in and we partner with the local church. We don't force any partnerships. We simply show up and say, if anyone is interested in partnering with us, we'd love to do it. It's an opt-in. The dynamics change, and I think a lot of times missions programs go in some sort of an assertive way, assuming that someone wants to partner with you. It changes if you go in with respect and say, here's who we are, here's what we have to offer. Would anyone like to partner with us? We partner with local churches, and we go through this meeting structure. It's a 5W meeting structure around the world. It starts with a welcome. We want to have Chick-fil-A hospitality. When people enter in, we want them to feel loved and special from the minute that they enter the door. And so we train staff members of how to make sure we greet everyone. And I would have failed the audit today. I did not shake all of your hands as you walked in, but that's the common practice. You greet every single person, affirming their dignity. Second thing is there's a time of worship, a time where individuals get to pray together, worship together. I don't have sound on this, so this probably isn't going to work, but this is just, what happens, and you can't hear that at all, can you? But it's awesome, trust me on this. And I think there's something awesome when you get to worship with individuals, when you get to change your horizon from just the current reality to remembering God's goodness, remembering that we serve a God who is in control. Something beautiful happens. To pray for each other when you're having issues. And then we go from this time of welcome, a time of worship, we go to a simple devotional of opening up Scripture and asking some pretty simple questions. The first question is, what does it say? And the second question is, what would it look like if we actually obeyed it? Read Scripture and ask those two questions, and it will dramatically impact your life. What did it say, and what would it look like if we actually obeyed it? So there's a simple devotional, oftentimes going through the book of John and going through the Gospels. And then there's this time of work, and this is where things get crazy, because up to that point, it sounds like a small group, right? It sounds like something that we've done as a small group, but then the crazy thing happens is you see this lockbox. We start in a model where we actually don't give anything away. We actually don't even provide investments. We start to change the thinking of poverty from solutions must be externally imported to thinking about you already have enough in your hands. And so we start by this model of individuals gathered together and they start saving money. And as crazy as that sounds, individuals in places of poverty, you make them save money? What in the world? Why would you do that? Couple reasons. The first thing is it means that they don't see themselves as poor anymore. As they start to work, they start to realize, wait a minute, we do have something. Second reason is it mobilizes capital. It takes capital that before was either frittered away or hid under a mattress and allows it to be productively used. The third thing, and perhaps most importantly, is it causes the time horizon to go from today to the future. There's a great article in The Economist that talks about the power of hope, and how oftentimes in places of poverty, the time horizon is just about today and not about tomorrow, not about the future. Saving is a bold declaration that there's something worth saving for. It changes your time horizon from thinking about what do we do today to thinking about there's something in the future. And so this crazy model mobilizes capital that people didn't even know was there. So in a simple model, we'll get 20 people together. Each of them will save 10 cents. And so over a period of 20 weeks, every single one of them will access $2 at one time. So the first week, everyone puts 10 cents on the table, and then Brian, you get the $2. And then the next week, Ron gets $2. And around it goes. And for the first time, $2 is actually enough to do something with. We had one group that started, and individuals thought, man, we are just too poor for us to do anything. First person started a small charcoal business. Second person got, their small investments. Next loan cycle, next time they gathered together, they said, let's not save 10 cents. Let's save $1 every week. And so then it was $20 mobilized at a time. I got to be with them in a community, and they had bought grinding mills that were grinding cassava flour. I got to ride in their truck that they had bought, a truck. Each of them had $1,100 in accumulated savings, and it started because they had agreed to meet together and save 10 cents. There's some mystery of capital. There really is a mystery of capital, where in the way that God made this beautiful world, it's possible to invest in a seed and harvest an entire just multiplication of that. I love that that's the way that God created the world, and that we get to see that. After that, after the time of work, people are saving, and then there's another system that we actually provide external investments. And again, it all just comes from this point, and then there's a wrap-up where we say, what are we going to do differently as a result? So welcome, worship, word, work, and wrap-up. This simple methodology allows people to be investors in their community, allows the church to be seen as a center of hope and healing, allows people to grow in discipleship, grow in their relationship with each other, grow in their relationship with the Lord, and has this weird mix of small group experience coupled with financial services. What a wacky model that is. And yet I believe it's just one example of how the church can see its mission, maybe in a new light, maybe in a new way. Yeah, good question.
That's all nice and well and good. But what do you do when people are hopeless? The community I live in, we're losing population, people are moving out. Better than 60% of the community is rental property.
Right.
They're hopeless. They hear stuff like this and they come in, they go, yeah, that works someplace else. It won't work for me. So as a church, how do I say it will work?
Yeah.
How do I create hope for the hopeless?
Yeah, I don't think you can. And so my experience is that that's a really important issue, and I don't know the answer. But we have found internationally that, and I believe the same principle applies here, the greatest teacher is not you. The greatest teacher is someone within that community already. And so what people will dismiss you for, they have a harder time dismissing their neighbor. So I was just in Haiti this summer, and I was meeting with this one group, and I was talking to them about this, and I was asking them their story, and they said the first time, it was only 8 of us that got together. And everyone said, we're too poor, this is never going to work. And then this small group of 8 started to have progress, and people pay attention because they know the history. They know Peter, and they're like, wait, Peter did this? Are you kidding me? That group of 8? And so you start to use the power of example, not from external, and I wouldn't use all this. I would simply describe this and find the early adapters that do exist in that community. Maybe it's the youth. Maybe you got to start with people that haven't yet fallen into a cycle. Maybe you got to find youth. We've done this simple system with kids and try to sow the seeds of thinking differently at a young age. Maybe it's finding the people that are just like the desperate people that just are recognizing that they're not going to be able to continue their education and they want to have a different life. Maybe it's individuals that I think one of the most powerful motives in the world is the power of a new parent. They will move mountains to provide for their family, to give that child a better life than they've had. So it's finding whatever the right audience is, the people that still have that glimmer of hope, and you fan that flame. You do everything possible to work with them before it gets squelched out. Like we talked about earlier, tragedy when an 11-year-old boy says, it's better for me not to have any dreams than to have them and know that they'll never become reality. So I think the key is to not force it on anyone, but to look for that person of peace. It's like that same kind of, look for those people that are willing to be the early adapters and do everything possible to love on them, to support them, help them become the best advertisements possible within their community, that there is hope, there is progress. Second thing is, this is why we spoke about it earlier, but I'm just not passionate about microfinance. I'm not passionate about economic development. I'm not passionate about about development. I'm passionate about the gospel. And because of that, I think you use these other tools that are centered on the gospel, and that's where you see things change. So this model, I think when I work in India, the caste system has a hold on hearts. And individuals have been taught to believe that there is no hope, there is no progress. The best you can do is be an excrement collector for your life and hope for a reincarnation at a higher class. Like, that's all you can do. So don't hope, don't dream. You're created to do that. Don't have any aspirations. And don't have aspirations for your kids, because they're getting the punishment that they deserve. That system needs to be broken, and I believe the most powerful way of breaking that is the gospel. To say, actually, there's a different story, there's a different narrative, and it starts with your worth, and you are worth so much that the God of the universe came down to give his life for you. That is a transforming message. And so this tool is cool when it is centered on the gospel. I believe that is when real, sustained, and powerful impact happens. So, yeah.
What's your response when you find out there's a misuse of funds that's coupled with a rejection of the gospel? So they're in your system, but they're misusing funds.
This is one of the other pieces in the model that I think is an essential piece, is that there is responsibility and accountability. And so the way that the system works is when we get together with the 20 group members, if the first person to get the money, if I'm the first person to get the money, I take my $20, I put it in my pocket, and I run, I'm out of there. It is then the obligation of the group to have the responsibility to say, what do we do? They are the ones that create the system on that, and I have seen incredible tenderness and grace when someone had a fire or a tragedy and simply isn't able next week to contribute their allocated amount and someone else covers for them. I have seen great firmness when there are individuals that take the money and run. And so the initial system it's built on trust. You choose, we're not forcing who's in the group. This is your group, this is your responsibility. But once you agree to the bylaws, then you have to follow up in a way. So it's choice and personal and group responsibility to ensure that happens. Yeah.
So you have a set of bylaws, and then you've just seen accountability sort of organically, like, or do you initiate the fact that accountability is needed?
It's their money. They don't need anyone to tell them that accountability is needed.
Okay.
And that's why, I mean, it's crazy in Hope's history. So right now, we started as a ministry trying to help 12 individuals in Ukraine in a church-to-church partnership. Today, we have now over $50 million in net portfolio outstanding in some of the most broken and corrupt places on earth, and we have a 98% repayment rate over the last 5 years. So, like, the system, if it's created, it becomes self-governing, and there's, that accountability is not externally imposed, but it's mobilized locally. Yeah. Yes.
I was just going to give a little testimony to the power of the gospel. I did a lot of work in the poorest Anglican diocese in India, very remote, very rural.
Wow.
And one of the things that the bishop wanted me to teach about, which shocked me, was stewardship.
Huh.
And all of the people were Dalits, they were untouchables, very forced to the poor, field laborers, so forth. And I just didn't feel comfortable being from one of the richest countries in the world to talk to some of the poorest people about money.
Right.
And the bishop backed me up against the wall, put his finger in my chest and said, "Don't rob my people of the dignity of being able to give."
Huh. Wow.
And so
Wow.
we did that, we talked about it, came back asked to come back the next year. And we did healing missions, and literally the blind received sight, and powerful things happened. And at the beginning of the time, I said, well, what did you learn last year that made a difference to you? That would be an encouragement to us.
Right.
And so people were sharing that I was received healing, and now I'm praying, and other things. And then a whole group of about 15 or 16 guys from the same village stood up. And they said, you told us of a God who is able to provide all that we need to do all that he wants. And so we would talk about that in our village after working in the fields all day. And we began to say, well, Lord, you know, we're poor. What have you given us? What do you want us to do? And they began to talk about friends that were sick and couldn't work, so their families were going hungry, or they'd broken an arm or a leg and couldn't work, or different things. And so we prayed, and God told us each to take a handful of rice or food that we had, and we put it in baskets. And we would take it at night and put it inside their hut. And at the end, their testimony was, in this past year, not a single person in our village went hungry.
Wow. Wow.
And what it all had to do with was their faith in God, who is able. And it was really, I mean, I just was very, very humbled by that. And then the thing that happened is another group of people stood up who were Hindu, who had watched all of this stuff going on and said, well, aren't you afraid you aren't going to have enough if you give it away? What about your own family?
Right.
And so they would talk about a God who was able to provide as we are faithful to, you know, bless others in the way that we've been blessed. And they discovered that a God who loved people, who gave dignity to people. The untouchables became people of power and purpose, and they had a testimony to give. They discovered that they had been blessed, and that even in their poverty, they could bless other people.
Wow.
And it began to change the whole community. And so these Hindus wanted to know this God.
Wow.
And so the bishop had a big baptism that went on. And so again, it was the link between the material, the spiritual, beginning to help people discover who they are in Christ, and beginning then to release that gift of faith. You know, and it was awesome. And I just said, you know, have them teach.
Right, exactly, yeah. And they are teaching. Yeah.
And it continues.
Yeah. There's did anyone read Rodney Stark's The Rise of Christianity? Anyone read that book?
Yeah.
About how these, you know, kind of 12 cowering disciples in a very short order. And one of the things that they found is that when there was in time of need, that it was the Christians who responded most generously. So when there was a famine, it was the Christians who were sharing their food. And when there was a plague, it was the Christians that were going and responding. So that if you were alive, you were the recipient of the love and compassion of Christians. And I still think that's one of the most powerful examples that we have, is generosity and love, and it is the difference of the gospel in a powerful way. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, good. Yes?
Pete, what are the unique challenges to doing what you've just described, having done internationally, to doing that here? And when the Kern Foundation brings you back in the next 5 years to kind of check in on this conversation, what would you need to see as evidence to prove or to confirm that the business community in Akron gets it?
Yeah. You know, I've been thinking about this, and so I started with some disclaimers this morning about kind of the scope of what it is that I'm involved with, not claiming to be an expert in a lot of the pieces of this conversation. But one of the things that I have loved doing is to try and say, you know, these principles, what is the application of these principles domestically? And what's the relevance of this in Akron? Because, you know, maybe some of the churches are doing these things internationally. Maybe some of you are partnering with a group like Hope. Maybe some of you are doing this internationally. But my guess is most of you are actively serving in your communities. And so just personally, I've had this strong interest. I've done a little bit of consulting with some organizations. And I think there are a couple principles that make this sort of a model effective. And the first is the gospel. Just don't forget that in the midst of doing all of this good work, the most valuable thing that we have to offer the world is not a job, but it's the gospel. And so, like, I want the church to be at the forefront of this. I feel like we're coming out of a period which I don't think history is going to be kind of having a faith that was disconnected from the needs of the world. I'm so excited about a faith that translates into a whole life, all in now and forever type theology. So I think that's the first piece, is to understand, like, man, the gospel changes everything. And the second piece then is, so what are the principles that make this work? Second thing is the power of community. Everything that we do at Hope is rooted in community, and it's rooted in relationship, and it's rooted with an accountability structure. We just don't think what the world needs is indiscriminate handouts. We just have never seen that last. What is good in an immediate time of crisis, the goal is always, always to make someone independent of our charity. And so everything that we do, everything that I'd encourage us out is it's not saying there's callousness towards immediate short-term relief, but there should be this holy discontent with a system that doesn't have an exit strategy from indiscriminate charity. And so that's a piece, and I believe that's powerfully in community. So that's number two. Number three, I feel like there's this idea that a job is better than a handout. Everything that we do at Hope is designed for true independence, and to have someone who at one point was a recipient of charity, to give them the joy of being a giver. Jesus was right that it is more blessed to give than receive. Brain science has confirmed that recently. It's been so fun to just kind of learn about, like, all the science behind the joy of giving. It's true. It really should be more blessed to give than receive. And then, so we think about then what are the barriers to work in the U.S. And here it's not just access to capital. That's one of the differences, that around the world, because there is no social safety net in the places where we serve, because there is 80% official unemployment in many places, there is a willingness, desire, drive, and there are no Walmarts. You need 1,000 micro-entrepreneurs to provide the goods and services in that community. So it is a different economy, and there an investment of $100 goes a whole lot further than what is here. And a savings account, or this sort of a model, that might not be the constraint. So what are the constraints to individuals having jobs, keeping jobs? And so I think there's this whole thing about job preparedness training. I mentioned Jobs for Life out of Raleigh, Durham area that I really appreciate. They do a great job in going and equipping churches. The Chalmers Center for Economic Development partners with churches in a similar way to help transition. There's a new book that just came out this week, Helping Without Hurting, a Guide to Church Benevolence. Just came out by Brian Fickert and Steve Corbett as kind of a practical application of some of the things that they were thinking about that I recommend to you. Then there also is this idea of it's understanding what are the constraints to jobs, and then how can the church be in it. But it's all rooted in relationships. I get excited about a program like Assets that is business coaching and mentoring alongside. So if people are willing to step out, that they're surrounded by a group of advisors who know they're not allowed to give them anything other than their support and their relationship. So there's a lot of mentoring models that are out there. I'm a big fan of Grace Period. It's trying to be an alternative to payday lending. I would think of what a great ministry of the church to put payday lending out. Financial counseling, I would say Crown Financial, or something like a Financial Peace University is an opportunity for individuals to get trained in how to. You can be poor earning $100,000. In fact, you could be in a negative equity position. A lot of people are in our country. So it's about stewardship with what we have. So there's a financial counseling aspect. There is a coaching, mentoring aspect. There's a community relationship aspect. And there's the beauty of relationship, life-on-life discipleship. That I think there's an increasing number of these examples It's not just about mobilizing capital. I think it's helping people to think differently in this. This is more fun to see if there are questions. I can talk for more stuff, but I feel like it would be more valuable just to see if there are any other questions that you have, or if you want me to keep on going. Any other questions on this? And again, I'd be happy to send, if anyone wants to give me, if you want to give me a business card, or just, I'll put my information up at the end. I wrote a little blog just trying to highlight some of the organizations domestically that are doing some great work that I think you might enjoy learning more about. So I'd be happy to share that as well if anyone is interested. Yeah.
But you talked about your strategies and your processes as a business, both on the home side and then what you do overseas, and then how open you are about sharing those things. Is there a place to access those things? Because I thought what you talked about earlier was brilliant. And is there a way that we can tap into that online, or how will we get access to some of those things that you have in place at Hope?
If you just want to write me a note and say open hands, we're right now developing and launching a new website, and there will be a portion of that, which we're just right now, working title is Open Hands, sharing everything that we have, open sourcing everything. So I'd be happy to share that. And the one thing that we ask is, as you tweak and learn, let us learn from your experience, what worked, what didn't, what was helpful, what wasn't on that as well. So that is a recent initiative. My story about the trademark and Bible verse has kind of created this whole fun initiative to think about. So it's not fully launched. We just have the staff members hired that are going to be working on this. So to be coming, but even right now, anything on governance or any of this stuff, I'd be happy to share as well. Yes?
Would you agree that one of the measures that would be helpful is that if the church shifts from short-term solutions to long-term strategy, that the perspective of Christians is no longer affected by election cycles? Because Ohio is a truly swing state. We will just get inundated for the next year with advertising from other groups that says, if you care about the poor, this is what you'll do. If you care about business, this is what you do. And so people end up kind of picking sides instead of having a distinctly long-term conversation that is not affected by how any specific election goes in either direction. That we're committed to something that transcends that.
Yeah, well said, well said. Yeah. And I think relatedly, I would love for the primary outreach of the church to go beyond short-term mission trips. That's not the default answer of what missions looks like, and a much bigger definition of, again, if there's any such thing as full-time kingdom service, full-time ministry, we're all in it. So a change in mentality, and that's really a part of what I'm so excited about, what Made to Flourish is all about. You are influential people in influential positions that have the very real possibility of giving a much bigger vision of what ministry and impact really look like. Thanks. Yes?
I was thinking about lessons learned earlier, and we'll repeat those in a moment, especially for people who weren't here. But I was thinking about how even in our churches, people can be consumers and we can be providing for them. And then thinking about that, you may have touched on it a little bit earlier, but those 5 lessons learned, think about in terms of how we pastor people in the local level. And like relief versus development.
Yes.
How many times do we relieve people, even in our parish, whatever it might be, rather than really helping them develop as Christians? And then the others, simple stories versus messy reality. I've been at retreats where sometimes people have made it sound like, oh, before I found Jesus, my life was clear and simple. Now it's messy, but they don't realize that there can be growth in that you realize that something's not wrong because it's messy. Look at how Jesus lived in the mess he was in the middle of. Symptoms versus root causes. Again, how in small groups or whatever it is, sometimes we can, the Bible study, it makes them feel good, they study the Gospel of Mark, but the deeper root, which you've been getting at all day, the deeper root causes that don't help really empower people and equip them to see not only what they can do in the church, but as disciples in the world. And then, the for us and with, for versus with, listen versus do, paternalism versus potential. I think that's good to look at all those lessons in terms of how we are ministering right within our faith communities.
I can't wait to hear how you go and live it out. Yeah, thanks for that. No, those are, again, I love the challenge that you have. No more important or difficult task than trying to take this and actually apply it in your life. Again, my wife and I have been really committed recently to stepping into some of the messy reality right around us. And again, just been broken by how close to home, you don't have to go around the world to find pain. And then understanding, we want to love our neighbors, the ones next door, and love our neighbors, the ones at the other side of the world. So thanks for that. I look forward to hearing more how you apply.
I just have a question, and I love Bob Lupton and Toxic Charity and Charity Detox and what you're describing, but like Gary Haugen in his latest book talked about, these systems require trust.
Sure, right.
And there's an injustice component in capitalism. While it's the greatest system in the world for raising material well-being,
right.
It also, where's a biblical or prophetic, or in your organization, have you guys had to engage with, again, speaking against injustice, or is this all, sometimes it feels like it's all just a celebration of the American way. If we can expand the economy, a rising tide will lift all boats. And that's that simple story. So is there things you guys have engaged with?
Totally. And in some ways, I think about it a lot, of how do we make sure we're not replacing the problems of poverty with the problems of prosperity. If prosperity were the cure to happiness, America would be the happiest country on earth, and we're not even close. And so this idea of faith in a system or faith in wealth is going to leave us in a situation where we will still be left wanting. And this, in my mind, is why the church has got to get it. I was with a group of kind of development practitioners, and I feel like there's starting to be this sensitivity to this reality that development practitioners are understanding, like, when our definition of poverty is strictly material, then you're not going to be ultimately that thrilled when material progress happens and there still is an emptiness of the soul. And again, so I think this is where my passion, I believe those of us in this room, is we've got something better than capitalism to offer the world. We've got something way better. Now, the question then is, how do we make sure we are kingdom people that are operating in ways that have impact? And that is a fun conversation that we've been trying to unpack today. But anytime you have faith in a system, I believe you're going to be let down. And I will say this, so I have great respect for Gary. He's been so gracious. We partner with IJM in some aftercare programs. I have felt and shared that the danger of the locus effect is anytime you try to make a case for causality, or anytime you try and elevate one issue, I believe you're truncating, you're falling into the spiritual danger of doing good, of elevating one piece that will therefore look for one solution. I think poverty is so complex that even if you fix the system, you're still going to have all kinds of other things. And this idea that we've got to put all of our emphasis on one area, I think elevates one approach and actually cheapens the reality is the church needs to be all in engaged. And so to say like it's all about job creation, or it's all about justice, or it's all about clean water and basic services, or it's all about education, I just feel like that, again, elevates one cause, makes some people feel like you got to give me more donations because we're the important ones. And those others, those are secondary class issues. If you really want to make an impact, you've really got to focus on this one approach. And I just feel like that kind of posturing tears down partnerships, puts up walls, and actually does not understand the complexity of the problem that we're trying to address. So that's kind of the one piece. I feel like it's all hands on deck, multiple approaches that are needed, multiple understanding how we're wired, what our passions are, go all in on that, and then link hands with anyone who is also trying to do similar work and walk together. There we go. This is fun. Yeah, Jeff.
Back to the story you told about Vienna, and you alluded just very briefly to the fact that there's a part of your program where you do bring additional capital to the table.
Right.
So here's my question. What would you need to see in Deanna's life and work as a result of your program and initial investment that would eventually qualify her business for additional outside capital as a multiplier? There seems to me that there's a development of the heart and the mind, a life and work evidence that you need to see in order to know that that person has learned what they need to learn to be faithful with more.
Yeah. So
what is that?
So for us as an organization, so we have two different models. We have church-based savings and credit associations, which is, I didn't even go into it, but like the lockbox that you saw, it's a system where they literally mobilize their own capital, 3 different locks on it. Someone else has the box, so they're only accessing these funds when everyone's together. Banking at the most grassroots level. We then have another model that called formal microfinance institutions. Those oftentimes are regulated banks in the countries where we operate, registered with a central bank that can mobilize savings, mobilize deposits, can do transfers across branches, and so serving people that the formal financial industry doesn't serve, we can kind of extend products and services to them. And so that model operates on the same way, where it's not necessary that we have to be the one who does the credit check. It still is a community-based system where you have to get the other group members to come in with you. And so it's a group where we offer individual products and services, but that are collateralized with a social guarantee, a social collateral at that level. And so that model is slightly different, but the primary impetus is on the group to do that, not necessarily us. But there you've got to have a more formal plan. You've got to make sure that this is not for startups, this is for scale-ups. So existing businesses that then either need more capital for whether it's working capital or whether it's some sort of investment in a productive asset. That's really the target market for that product. But again, it's all really based at the community level where they do the screening. Yes?
All right, so this question may be above what our honorarium to you deserves, but kind of this is, I guess I'm thinking we have marketplace leaders in the room here with pastors, and I think a lot of it has been about church, and I know you're talking broader church than just the pastor, but a lot of our conversation today is what about the pastor's role?
Yeah.
You have this moment to speak to the marketplace leaders and their encouragement and role back into the pastors and back into the life of the church. What would be your encouragement to them or your exhortation to them?
I don't know enough where you are. I just know kind of my own experience is that I think that the greatest untapped resource in the church today are marketplace leaders. I think they are an untapped resource that is just waiting to be awakened. And maybe just I could tell you one quick story on this. So one of the individuals, his name is Alan Barnhart, and he is a leader among leaders. Does anyone know Alan? Have you had time? Any Barnhart trained in rigging? They're out of Memphis, Tennessee. He is a remarkable individual, and early on in his career, he and his wife were deciding whether or not to go into full-time missions. And they were given this opportunity. They were approved to go into international, with like an SIM or a missions organization. his father was retiring and asked him if he would want to take over the family business. And so the family was given this opportunity. His wife Catherine is incredible as well. But they said early on, as they were looking at these options, they said, the heart is the same. God, where can we serve you? Where can we have the biggest impact? They ended up going into the family business. And one of the things that they did early on is he said, I read scripture and I realize money captures the heart. It's pretty dangerous. So one of the things that they did early on, they gave away 99% of the company to the National Christian Foundation. They still retained the voting stock, the voting control. They still operated. And he took a salary at what a nonprofit ministry executive would take. And so his lifestyle has not changed. And so instead of asking the question, how much should I give away? He said, how much should I keep? And then how do I give away everything else? But that's not necessarily the cool part. So, they gross, 300, 400 million, healthy profit margins. They've been growing really fast. They're kind of like engineers, MacGyvers, that go and move things that people find too difficult. So they'll move buildings, they'll move wind turbines, they'll move things that are just too big for anyone to move. And they celebrate the impact that they can have. But the thing that I find cool is they understand like the mission field is their employees, and they invest well. And I think I've met too many marketplace leaders that have a small definition of ministry that's maximizing their amount that they can give away and missing on the opportunity to love and serve the employees that are right there. And so for the marketplace leaders, I just would love to encourage you, as you go and do this work, don't miss the mission field that is right around you. And how would your employees talk about you when you're not there? How would they say that is someone who, because he or she loves Jesus so much, they treat me differently. Because of their faith, I know that that's just a different sort of leader that I've never experienced before. And I think that's the great opportunity, is for marketplace leaders to have the same level of intentionality in full-on life mission as someone who goes to Afghanistan to do church planting, have that same level of intentionality, that same level of commitment, that same level of radical devotion in the marketplace as they would anywhere else. And I think that's where the world's going to perk up. I think that's where the difference is going to be seen. It's a different economy, and it's just super exciting.